What we're really telling Palestinians fighting apartheid is the same thing being told to my fellow Black Americans across our country.
What Americans are seeing in the coverage of the Palestine-Israel story, finally, is a dominant news narrative under assault.
We don't share the same rights as the Israeli Jews.
They turn on U.S. news channels and hear terminology they've seldom heard attached to this conflict.
The idea that it's even remotely controversial to call what Israel has imposed on Palestinians a form of apartheid is laughable.
They see more Palestinian faces than the networks usually serve up, something approaching a balance.
This is a movement against settler colonialism, which seeks to remove Palestinians and place Jewish Zionist settlers in their place.
When they check out the New York Times, they see op-eds and images the paper had rarely found fit to print until now.
The discourse is substantially different this time around. It remains deeply problematic, but nonetheless, it's a massive improvement over what it was like in previous massive Israeli assaults on Gaza.
Everything changed on this Israeli attack. Social media played a large role in shaping the American discourse, and as one Zionist organization said this week, Israel could do nothing right on social media.
Israel hit Gaza with air.
It truly does feel different, and it feels like it has the potential to significantly change how the world views this ongoing Israeli-Palestinian crisis.
Why now? Israel has sent settlers in before to expel Palestinians from their homes, as it's preparing to do in Sheikh Jarrah, East Jerusalem. It's waged war on Gaza 5 times since 2005, each time inflicting far more civilian casualties than it suffered, resulting in accusations of war crimes. Israel has targeted news outlets before, as it just did when it destroyed the offices of the Associated Press and Al Jazeera in Gaza. None of that is new. What has changed is the mobilizing effect that all the video coming out on this story has had on people thousands of miles from the Holy Land. And there are new communities on social media carrying that content. Informal networks built by Americans to demand social justice at home that have proven to be adaptable.
Just as the progressive media have shaped the American response to the George Floyd murder and led the way toward a real reckoning in the American public opinion about our treatment of people of color in the United States, the same effect happened on the mainstream media and public opinion, I believe, with respect to Palestinians this time.
Social media has played a great role in educating people around the world about Palestinians. When it comes to the United States, the media could not deny the videos that were coming out of Gaza, of children crying over their parents or parents burying their children. Even the more sentimental videos of kids looking for their toys or finding a little goldfish that was still alive. It really spoke to the hearts of people around the world.
On the coverage of this long-term conflict, terminology is yet another battleground. One word that American journalists have long had an aversion to when describing Israel's systemic treatment of Palestinians is a term that originated in South Africa and its history of racial oppression: apartheid. 15 years ago, when former President Jimmy Carter dared to use apartheid in a book title, he was deemed to have gone too far. The only American president to ever win a Nobel Peace Prize for their work in the Middle East, Carter was effectively blackballed, exiled by both the U.S. political and media establishments. It's only one word, but the fact that American journalists and commentators are now able to utter it,
to call Israel an apartheid state,
and news outlets are allowing that, is significant.
There are a number of liberals who use the word apartheid to describe Israel's treatment of the Palestinians.
Accusing Israel of apartheid.
Apartheid is a word that has been used by Human Rights Watch, by Amnesty International. It's even been used by B'Tselem, which is the largest Israeli-led human rights organization within Israel. Apartheid is when you separate people based on ethnicity or based on nationality, where one group has more rights than the other just based on who they are. And that is fundamentally fundamentally exactly what is happening in Palestine, Israel at this moment. And so usage of the word apartheid is not just something that is controversial, it's necessary.
The fact that we're having this conversation, journalists in newsrooms are writing articles about the question of, do you call it apartheid? Do you call it ethnic cleansing? All that. I think that's enormously positive. And that shows a shift in people, not just merely being willing to rethink their assumptions, but being capable of rethinking their assumptions.
People have to recognize what Gaza Strip is. It's one of the most menacing.
The U.S. mainstream media are slowly moving in the right direction on this story. Sometimes, though, it's a case of 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Take the example of 22-year-old Emily Wilder, recently hired by the Associated Press to work in Arizona. 4 days after the Israelis blew up the AP's offices in Gaza, Wilder was fired. Pro-Israel elements online had publicized some of Wilder's pro-Palestinian social media posts from her college days.
The best defense for those who want to defend Israel for bombing AP is to, in effect, accuse AP of being in bed with Hamas, and then you just start searching for dirt. And AP decided to throw a young journalist who, by the way, is Jewish, just to throw her under the bus. It's pretty breathtaking. The suggestion is that if you are an activist in support of Palestinian rights, it means you can't be a journalist who reports objectively.
The truth at the end of the day is that everybody has biases. And all you can do is be honest about these biases so that we understand where the reporting is coming from, what shapes it. This idea that you must exclude anybody who has a history of advocating for Palestinian human rights, while people who have much more nefarious histories of being participants in an illegal occupation and a system of apartheid, that's a double standard that's just simply absurd on its face.
Journalists like Canadian-born Matty Friedman, now based in Jerusalem. The AP employed him in Israel until 2014, after he had done a stint in the Israeli army. Last week, Friedman filed a story for another U.S. news outlet, The Atlantic, whose editor-in-chief, American Jeffrey Goldberg, moved to Israel in his 20s, volunteered for the army, and was a guard at a prison notorious for its treatment of Palestinians. Current New York Times political columnist David Brooks and former Jerusalem bureau chief Ethan Bronner, both of them American, have had sons in the Israeli army. And on the broadcast side, there's news anchor Wolf Blitzer. His bio on CNN's site is thick with detail on the stories he's covered, the interviews he's conducted, the honorary degrees he's received. Not one mention, though, of his former job at the biggest, most influential pro-Israel lobby group of them all, AIPAC.
There's a strong Israel today, a vibrant Israel that is not going to disappear.
Wolf Blitzer at CNN worked for AIPAC, helped destroy the two-state solution back in the 80s, a story I always want to tell. And, you know, this guy, he's forgiven his resume. I think that Wolf Blitzer understands that his job is not to support AIPAC now. His job is to get a range of opinion in, and I sense that he feels a responsibility to do so.
Ben Wiedemann is on the scene for us. He's now in Gaza. You're there. You're an eyewitness.
Just as Emily Wilder, a very young person who had done good work in college, I'm sure was going to be strenuously trying to do her job as an Associated Press reporter. But that double standard is obnoxious.
We're not asking the media outlets to be pro-Palestine. I don't need Emily to be pro-Palestine. I don't need journalists to be pro-Palestine. I need you to be objective, to tell us what the facts are on the ground. And the facts are very clear. There's an occupation that is illegal and funded by the US government. The apartheid is clear. The siege on Gaza is clear. And unfortunately, the double standard is because if the American people truly knew what was happening in Palestine, and knowing that it is funded by their taxpayer dollars, I think there would be a resurgence of a resistance that the government of the United States of America would not be able to ignore.